Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling complexity economics.
Okay.
And this is a really interesting area. We've got a whole bunch of W. Brian Arthur's work to go through. He's like
Wow.
a leading thinker in this area. And by the end of this deep dive, you're going to have a whole different way of looking at the economy.
I'm excited.
All right, so first things first, what exactly is complexity economics?
Okay, so traditional economics often looks at the economy as a system that eventually settles into like a predictable equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
Complexity economics challenges. It's instead that we should look at the economy as a constantly evolving complex system.
So more like an ecosystem.
Exactly like a living, breathing thing.
Okay, so less about perfect models and more about messy reality.
Yes, exactly. Think about a traffic jam.
Right.
One tiny slowdown can trigger this chain reaction,
Right.
leading to this massive backup out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's those feedback loops that amplify these little disruptions. Complexity economics suggests that the economy works in a similar way.
So instead of need equations, we're talking about chaos.
Not exactly chaos, but
Yeah.
definitely a lot more unpredictable than traditional models would have us believe.
Okay.
And to illustrate this, there's this thought experiment that Arthur uses
Okay.
called the L. Farrell bar problem.
L. Farrell bar problem? I've heard of this, but refresh my memory.
Okay, so imagine a bar with limited capacity.
Mm-hmm.
People only want to go on Thursday nights if it's not too crowded.
Right.
But the only information they have is how crowded it was in past weeks.
Okay.
So if everyone assumes it'll be packed and stays home, the bar will be empty.
Makes sense.
But if everyone thinks it'll be empty and shows up,
Oh.
it'll be overflowing.
Yeah, sounds like a recipe for social anxiety.
It really does,
Yeah.
right? But it highlights this thing. Even when individuals try to make rational choices based on what they know,
Yeah.
the collective outcome can be totally unpredictable.
So no perfectly efficient market.
Exactly. It throws a wrench in that idea.
Okay, so how does this play out in the real world?
Well-
What about like the stock market?
That's where Arthur's research with an artificial stock market comes in.
Okay.
He created a simulated market with programs representing investors,
Interesting.
each making decisions based on, evolving predictions.
So what do you find?
What they found was that the market could shift
Okay.
from a rational expectation state
Mm-hmm.
where prices reflect all the available information
Right.
to what they call a complex regime.
Complex regime. What's that?
In this complex regime, things like herd behavior and trends start driving the market.
So not just fundamentals.
Right. It's not just about the company's performance anymore.
Hold on. So what does that mean for those crazy bubbles and crashes we see?
Well, they
Just random.
not exactly random, but definitely influenced by these psychological factors.
Okay.
In the complex regime, even a small event can trigger this cascade
Oh, wow.
of buying or selling, leading to those dramatic swings.
So investors' expectations become self-fulfilling prophecies?
Exactly. If enough people believe a stock is going up,
Yeah.
they'll buy it, driving the price up even further,
Interesting.
reinforcing that initial belief.
So like a collective mood swing, but with potentially disastrous consequences.
You could say that.
Okay.
It challenges the view that prices always reflect a company's true value.
This is starting to make sense, but
Mhm.
where does technology fit into all of this?
That's a great question.
I know Arthur talks about that a lot.
He does. Arthur sees technology as this driving force of how the economy evolves.
Okay.
He uses this analogy of the economy forming like a branching arterial system.
Interesting.
Imagine the economy as a growing tree.
Okay.
The trunk is the basic infrastructure like energy and transportation.
Right.
As new technologies emerge, they branch out from this trunk,
Okay.
creating whole new industries, markets, opportunities.
So it's not just old tech being replaced, it's like this constant expansion.
Exactly. It's constantly creating new economic ecosystems.
Okay, perfect example. The internet started as this niche thing and then bam, exploded into e-commerce, social media, cloud computing,
Right.
countless other things.
And the crazy part is, no one could have predicted exactly how it would unfold.
So this process is inherently unpredictable.
It is.
We can't just map out the future of technology, right?
Right.
But doesn't that make it hard to make good decisions?
That's a great point.
Especially when it comes to things like investments or business strategy.
It does. And this brings us to one of Arthur's most thought-provoking concepts,
Okay.
lock-in.
Lock-in. Now that is a concept that always gets me thinking. Why would a free market get us stuck with a technology or a standard that isn't even the best?
It might seem counterintuitive, but think about it this way.
Okay.
Even small early choices can have a huge impact
Okay.
on how technology evolves,
Mm-hmm.
even if those choices weren't the best in the long run.
Okay. I need an example.
Okay, think about the QWERTY keyboard layout.
All right. The QWERTY keyboard.
It was designed to prevent typewriter keys from jamming. Everyone agrees it's not the most efficient layout.
Yeah, but we're still using it.
And yet here we are still using it.
Oh, why?
Because we're locked in. Once QWERTY became the standard, everyone learned to type on it.
Right.
Manufacturers made QWERTY keyboards.
Yeah.
Changing everything over would be too costly and too disruptive.
So we're stuck.
The same thing happened with light water nuclear reactors,
Huh.
even with potentially better alternatives out there.
Wow, that's a sobering thought.
It is.
We can get stuck on a path even when we know it's not the best, simply because of the momentum of past choices.
Exactly. And this has big implications for how we think about economic development and innovation.
Okay.
It's not always about finding the absolute best solution.
Right.
Sometimes it's about understanding the path we're on
Yeah.
and making choices that take into account this idea of lock-in.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Complexity, unpredictability, feedback loops. And now this concept of lock-in. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But before we move on, I want to connect all of this to you, the listener.
Okay.
Have you ever felt stuck with a technology or a standard that you knew wasn't the best? How can understanding lock-in help you make different choices in the future?
That's such a crucial question. It's about being aware of those small choices we make early on
Yeah.
and how they can snowball into much larger consequences down the line.
So maybe it's worth taking a step back sometimes and considering the bigger picture, the long-term implications, even when it comes to something as mundane as a keyboard layout.
Absolutely.
So it's about thinking strategically,
Yes.
considering the potential for a lock-in, making choices that align with our long-term goals.
Exactly.
We'll be back in a moment to explore more of these insights from Complexity Economics, so stay tuned.
It's all about how things change over time.
Yeah.
And that's one of the key things that makes complexity economics so fascinating, traditional economics, with its focus on equilibrium.
Right.
It kind of struggles to explain how the economy actually changes.
Yeah, it's like trying to predict the weather months in advance.
Right.
Too many factors at play. So how does complexity economics deal with that? Does it even try to predict what's going to happen?
That's the interesting part.
Okay.
Instead of focusing on specific outcomes, it tries to understand the underlying processes of change.
Okay, so it's about identifying those feedback loops,
Yeah, exactly,
the things that create the snowball effect.
Yeah.
Okay, give me a real-world example of that.
Let's think about the rise of social media.
Okay.
No one could have predicted exactly how it would explode,
Right.
but you can see how the nature of networks, that connectivity,
Yeah.
created this positive feedback loop.
Okay.
More users meant more content,
Mm-hmm.
which attracted even more users,
Right.
and so on and so on.
So it's less about saying this specific company will be the winner. It's more about understanding those dynamics
Exactly.
that create the playing field in the first place.
Right, and that can be incredibly useful for decision-making. If you can understand those underlying forces, you can kind of anticipate how things might play out
Right.
and position yourself accordingly.
You can spot those emerging technologies, shifting trends, things
Yeah.
that could disrupt industries.
Exactly.
So you're not just reacting to what's already happened. You're trying to get ahead of the curve.
Right. It's about being proactive.
This reminds me of something Arthur said about the importance of small events in history.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
That's a core idea in complexity economics.
Okay.
These seemingly random small events can have a huge impact
Okay.
on the long-term trajectory of the economy.
All right, like chaos theory,
It is like chaos theory.
but for business and markets.
Exactly.
Okay.
Walk me through it.
Okay, so think about the development of the personal computer.
Okay.
All these different factors coming together. Some technological advancements,
Right.
some social trends,
Yeah.
maybe even some plain old luck. What if Steve Jobs hadn't dropped out of college?
Or if Bill Gates hadn't had that fateful meeting with IBM,
Yeah.
the landscape of technology could be totally different today.
Just a butterfly flapping its wings
Yeah,
and causing a hurricane on the other side of the world.
exactly. And that's something traditional economic models often miss.
Okay.
They tend to assume that the system will always go back to a specific equilibrium,
Right.
regardless of those little unpredictable events.
But complexity economics is saying that those small events, can push the system onto a totally different path.
Exactly.
It's like we're not just living in the present, we're carrying the weight of all those past decisions. That got us here.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing. The future isn't set in stone. We have a role in shaping it.
Absolutely. That's a really empowering takeaway.
Okay.
Complexity economics helps us see the economy as something that we can influence, something we can shape.
Through our choices, our innovations, our actions.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered complexity, unpredictability, feedback loops, the role of those historical events, a lot of big ideas. Before we move on, can you give us a quick recap?
Sure.
What are the most important things to remember from Arthur's work?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the economy isn't a machine.
Okay.
It's more like a living organism.
Interesting.
It's constantly learning, adapting, and responding to what we do within it.
Okay, and another key point is that it's not about reaching a state of perfect equilibrium.
Right.
It's always in motion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Driven by those feedback loops that we were talking about.
And it's that unpredictability that makes the economy so dynamic and innovative.
Absolutely.
So it's less about trying to control everything and more about understanding the forces at play and learning to navigate them.
Precisely. It's a shift in perspective. That can be incredibly helpful in understanding the complexities of the modern economy.
There's one more piece I want to explore before we wrap up.
Okay.
It's a bit more philosophical, but I think it's really crucial to grasp.
Okay.
Arthur talks a lot about the role of subjective beliefs
Yeah.
in shaping the economy.
That's where it gets really interesting.
This is where he digs into the psychology behind it.
He does. Traditional economics assumes everyone is perfectly rational,
Right.
making decisions based on objective information.
Yeah.
But Arthur points out that, in reality, our choices are deeply influenced by our subjective beliefs.
Right, our individual perceptions and biases.
Yes, and those beliefs are constantly being shaped by our experiences, the people we interact with, the feedback we receive, everything.
It's like that saying, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are.
Exactly.
And that has huge implications for economics, because it suggests that the economy isn't just driven by those objective forces like supply and demand.
Right.
It's also shaped by our collective beliefs.
Yes.
The stories we tell ourselves, our expectations about the future.
And you know, if enough people believe something is true, it can actually become true.
Wow.
Regardless of whether there was any objective basis for it.
So that sounds a lot like self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yeah.
Think about those stock market bubbles we were talking about earlier.
That
They're
did.
fueled by this belief that prices will just keep going up.
Right.
Which leads to more buying, which drives the prices up even further.
And this is where complexity economics starts to bridge the gap between economics and psychology.
Okay.
It acknowledges that our beliefs, our emotions, our cognitive biases, all of that plays a role in shaping economic outcomes.
So it's a more holistic view,
Exactly.
one that recognizes the complex interplay between individual behavior, social dynamics, and those larger forces at work in the system.
It's not just numbers and equations. It's about understanding the human element.
And we need to pay attention to not just what people do, but also what they believe.
Yes. And that's a pretty powerful insight. It means we're not just passive players in this system.
Right. Our beliefs, our stories, our actions, they all contribute to shaping the economic landscape.
It's a reminder that the economy isn't this fixed external force acting upon us. We are the economy.
Yes.
Our choices, our actions, our interactions, they all contribute to creating this complex, ever-evolving system that we live in.
We'll be back in a moment to wrap up our deep dive into complexity economics. Stay with us.
Right, and we're back, wrapping up our exploration of complexity economics. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From feedback loops to the power of those small events, even delved into the psychology behind how we make decisions in a complex world. But now I want to bring it all home for you, the listener.
Okay.
What's the big takeaway here?
Yeah.
Why should complexity economics matter to you?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? It's not just some abstract academic theory.
Right.
It's a really practical way of looking at the world and making decisions.
Okay.
It helps us think differently about how we plan for the future and how we navigate this increasingly complex and unpredictable world.
So how do we actually apply these insights?
Well,
Give us some concrete advice.
one of the most important things is to embrace experimentation.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to try new things.
Explore different possibilities, even if they seem a bit out there.
So be adaptable, be open to new information,
Yeah,
be willing to change course if things aren't working.
exactly, because in a complex world, the best strategy isn't always to have a rigid plan.
Right.
It's to be flexible
Okay.
and adjust to the unexpected.
Another key takeaway is to pay attention to those small events.
Yes, those seemingly insignificant things
Right.
that could have ripple effects down the line.
Okay, so it's about recognizing emerging patterns, those subtle shifts that might signal a larger trend.
It's like being a detective, always looking for clues.
I like that analogy. But it also brings up a big question.
Okay.
If the economy is constantly changing and so unpredictable, what does that mean for how we make decisions in our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question,
Right.
and it's something we all have to grapple with in our own way.
Okay.
There's no easy answer, no one-size-fits-all solution. But complexity economics gives us a framework for thinking,
Okay.
a new lens for looking at the world.
Yep.
That can help us navigate this uncertainty.
So it's about embracing the unknown, recognizing that the future isn't preordained,
Yeah.
that we have the power to shape it.
It's about being humble, being open to learning, being willing to adapt and change. And maybe most importantly, it's about remembering that we're all in this together.
I love that.
We're all part of this complex, interconnected system. And our choices, our actions, have an impact on the whole.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive observers, we're active participants in shaping the economic landscape.
I like that.
Well, that just about wraps up our deep dive into complexity economics. I don't know about you, but I'm walking away with a whole new perspective on how the world works.
It encourages you to keep asking questions, keep learning,
Yeah,
embrace the complexity of it all.
couldn't have said it better myself. Huge thank you to you, the listener, for joining us on this journey. I hope you found it as fascinating and thought-provoking as we did. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep questioning the assumptions that shape our world